after the next contraction, the restriction would come back. And I'm like, okay, why does that keep coming back? Why does it keep returning? We just fixed it. What's going on there?
Well, hello everyone and welcome. We are live. I am joined with Kristen Hosaka, who is a chiropractor, a dynamic body balancing teacher, and so much more. You do so many cool things and I've loved to see your journey. We met when you were teaching with Dr. Carol Phillips, dynamic body balancing, and I just loved your energy and the way you teach and what you offer to the world. And then you went through our Body Ready Method professional training this year, and so we got to kind of spend a little more time together, and it's just really cool. I just want to highlight people doing really impactful work in the world. So thank you for being here and sharing with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's really exciting to be part of, changing birth. And I love being able to share that with people.
Yeah, so I'd love for people to I shared like probably a sliver of what you actually do. And so I would love for people to I would just love to hear, kind of tell us your tale, like what led you to kind of the work you're doing today, and then maybe more about what that work really is.
Right. So, I always say it's a series of happy accidents that brought me to where I am today. So, um, I don't think that there's actually ever any accidents that I was sort of led down this path. I feel like God's just opened doors, door after door after door, to bring me to where I am. And I think my desire to be part of the birth world started in my first pregnancy, as it does with many, many women. And I wanted to help change the dynamic in birth, because my first birth was really, really hard. Looking back, it wasn't that long. It was 12 hours, but she had a nuchal hand, which made it extremely painful, more painful than I think it should have been, or could have been. Maybe not should, but could have been.
Can you quick define for those who don't know what a nuchal hand is?
Yeah, a nuchal hand is when the hand is born with the baby. I always tease my oldest that she came out a diva, with her hand flagrant to the world. Um, and when that hand is up by the head, it creates an extra pain point. And if you take your hands and you squeeze around a water bottle, it's even pressure. If you put a Lego in there, it hurts.
Yes.
And so I consider, the hand's kind of like the Lego. It hurts more when there's more, there's more parts that are trying to come out all at once, but it's also asymmetrical, so it creates pain point. And so I had that with my first pregnancy. And I had chiropractic throughout my pregnancy, all of my pregnancies actually. And that made a huge difference in my life. I was able to function better because I was more balanced and my nervous system was working better. But it didn't solve all the issues. And over time, I actually started working with the birth center because they called me up out of the blue while I was first starting my practice and said, hey, do you know Webster technique, which is an analysis technique we use on the pelvis for chiropractors. And I said, no, but I was scrolling on my computer. I will take it in September. What can I do to help you?
Amazing. The universe was like, hey, do this.
Yeah. And so I did. And I started working out of the birth center and attended over 200 births, I think, in their birth center, and many more outside of that as well. So I've attended a lot of birth, attended a lot of labors, and I've probably been part of over 1,000 labors as people have come into my practice, on their way to the birth center, or maybe they were stalled in labor and they called me in to do some balancing work and adjustments, either spinning babies or, just doing what I do. And so I've been privy to a lot of amazing moments and seen a lot and developed a lot of new techniques through that experience, like we all have.
Right. Yeah. I think birth is one of the greatest teachers, right? It's like you never know sometimes what you're going to get. And the same thing. That's how a lot of things I've developed. You're like, okay, I'm at this birth. This muscle is not releasing. The baby is struggling to do this. So what can I do to fix that? And knowing kind of like the why and the physiology and the movement and all of that, like allows us to be those troubleshooters, right? Like it allows us to like tune in both intuitively, but also using kind of all this stuff we've learned backed up by our intuition to help people. And I think that's Super, super cool. So you've gone to a lot of births, you've worked with a lot of people. What would you say has been like the biggest shift for you, right? I know it kind of started with this shift because you do a lot of work teaching people about nuchal hands and different compound presentations, which is like, something doing, this or that or whatever. So I know like that was kind of like a big moment for you at the beginning. Have there been moments like as you've continued through that have been just like, oh, this was like the next big pivotal moment for me?
Yeah, I mean, one story that's coming to my head is I was working with a woman in labor, and I would adjust her, and then every time I would adjust her after the next contraction, the restriction would come back. And I'm like, okay, why does that keep coming back? Why does it keep returning? We just fixed it. What's going on there? And it just kept returning and kept returning, and we kept fixing it and kept fixing it. And then finally, I started to feel how her sacrum was moving with each contraction. And I could feel it move on one side, and it wasn't really moving on the other side without restriction. And then all of a sudden, the sacrum it felt like it moved 6 inches under my hands. Obviously, it didn't. It just moved a little bit. But sometimes, when you have your eyes,
Feels like a lot.
yeah, everything, it magnifies.
Right.
And so it felt like this huge shift. And then she went through the end of that contraction, one more contraction, and then she started pushing. And it was this really aha moment of, okay, why did the sacrum move that much? What could have just happened? And then she started pushing, and I'm like, oh, the baby's head just went through the cervix. And all of a sudden, the sacrum was free to move up as the fundus was pulling on the ligaments that attached to the sacrum. Everything just shifted upwards. And it was one of the coolest things that I think I'd ever felt in my life, was how that shifted. So then I started to look at what the sacrum does in that movement and what different motion means during labor. Whether it's restricted on both sides, or that it's restricted on one side, if it's moving asymmetrically. And I just started putting all of that together, and I found that you can almost diagnose, or suspect, maybe is a better word, a nuchal hand, just by how the sacrum's moving with each contraction. And so that was a really big aha moment, and it started putting more of her nuchal hand pieces together for me, and then started really opening the magic of births. It's our bodies have a process they should go through during birth, and when that's out of balance or not working right, where can we look to find more answers? And it's always a mystery. Each person is so different, and they come in so different in their restriction patterns, and their life experiences and their traumas and their movement practices. So everybody's always a little bit different, and you can start to see general patterns in your practice, but there's never the same person coming in twice.
I love that though, right? I think it's more fun, right? I think that's why it's good to have protocols, things like, do these 3 things, or do these things in this situation, but also know that we can sometimes move. It's also good to move beyond those sometimes, right? It's like following a recipe and being a chef, right? They're different skill sets. Like we can all follow a recipe, and we kind of need to start there, right? And those recipes are going to work for a large amount of people, right? But then, this oven temperature is different, or you live in the tropics, or, it's like the metaphor breaks down a little bit, but it's all about like, wow, what is this person's life, right? Like I know we're probably very similar. Like I'm asking people, what sports did you play? Have you been in any car accidents? For me, it's like I was a ski racer. So how many times did I fall down a hill, right? Every time I do like a fascial unwinding, my body just wants to roll down hills, right? And so I just think that's the beauty of this work, and why I feel like it doesn't get boring maybe for me, is because everyone is this beautiful, unique individual with their own life story, their own movement story, their own, nervous system journey, right? We're all like coming in it at different angles. And that's the beauty of, I think, as professionals, we were talking before we went live about how the thing I love about you, and maybe like why we vibe, is like we're both just we're very curious. I think that's something we're both very curious, and then we both are like, okay, what more is there to learn, right? Because I think sometimes the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. Right, right. And so it's always about, this growth and journey. Some people maybe, you get your doula certification, you get your chiropractic or whatever it may be, and then you're like, okay, now I'm good and I'm ready to practice. What would you say to that? Like, what do you say to those people who are like, well, I'm already certified, so like I'm good.
It's a great start.
Yeah.
And you're good until you're not. And it works for
Right.
80% of the people, but what about the other 20%?
Right.
There was an old saying in chiropractic that, 80% of the time people are going to get better no matter what you do. Just because you've got hands on and your intent is to help them. 10% stay the same and another 10% make it worse or may need something different. I don't like those odds. I want to be like 99% or 100%.
Right.
And I feel like, I don't think that's ever truly attainable because everybody is different. And every time I think I've got it, somebody walks in the door and I'm like, what's going on here?
Something new to learn.
And it's a new mystery. And I feel like in those moments I tend to get, three or four or five of them or 10 of them until I learn something new. And so the cycle repeats. I think as, God brings that into my space and says, hey, you need to add this to your toolbox. And, a couple of months ago, I was working with my daughter, she's 36 weeks pregnant now. So it's pretty awesome to watch her. But she had a really tight, broad ligament on the left, and it wouldn't release, wouldn't release, wouldn't release. And we were doing all the things. And so I, just started thinking about the physiology. Where does the broad ligament attach? Where can I get a different angle to work that broad ligament? And I invented a new technique that I never used before. And, maybe somebody else uses it, but, I just eat stuff up in my practice and then I keep trying it and it's worked with other people. And now it's my new favorite thing. So
That's so cool. And I want people to really hear that too, of like, keep being curious and learn about things like Kristen knows things and you can look them up, right? Like these things are not, you can figure out what are the attachment and points of that. But like being curious and knowing some anatomy and physiology and different things allows you to like learn and create new experiences. That's why I want every perinatal person or person in working in that space to just know the biomechanics of the pelvis as like a baseline. Like, I go and speak, ACOG or ACNA, and it's not taught, right? Like they're not taught. Like these things to me are simple because I teach it every day, and you have these things you're like, oh, of course. But it's not necessarily general knowledge, but it should be, right? Because if these people even just knew like when they reach their arm this way or they rotate their knee or leg this way, what's happening in the pelvis? And if you know that, then you can create your own birth position, right? You can be like, oh, well, the baby's here. So if this person isn't intuitively finding this, I can use this information that I've learned to do something new. And I think that's the beauty of this work, right? Is continuously figuring it out. Yeah, so I'd love to hear, so you, like, I just want people to know kind of where they can interact with you and learn with you. And I would love to dive just a little bit more into your work with Nuchal hands and compound presentations, because I know that's not something that's talked about a lot. And you've talked on our podcast about it. That's no longer running, but we still have that episode for people. But I love for people who are just now learning from you. You said something about the asymmetry of the sacrum. Are there other signs that a baby could be in a compound presentation?
there's a ton of signs, and so many of them. I think that, I just spent the weekend doing a Staying Baby Skills, birth skills workshop with Gail Tully, and I presented my ankle hands information, and most of the nurses were just like, that makes so much sense, because these are things they see in practice every day and they suspect it, but they didn't have like a good set. I'm going to see this, 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 and this.
Yes.
I feel like I've kind of, broken that down, and what I did was reverse engineer it when I started developing it by looking at how the babies were sleeping when they came into my office. I'm kind of in a unique position to see our folks not only prenatally but through preconception, oftentimes, through pregnancy, through postpartum. And now I have babies that I worked with in utero that they're driving now, which makes me feel a little like, oh, but I've been able to watch them grow up. And pediatricians don't get that. Midwives don't get that unless they have, multiple babies from the same mom. After, and they see their siblings grow up. But most of the time it's 6 weeks, right? Postpartum. Like 6 to 8 weeks is your last visit, and then they may or may not ever see him. So I get to watch these kiddos, and I get to see what happens in their bodies. And what I started seeing is that, I'm going to bring my baby doll out.
I love it.
A lot of these little babies would, come into the office with their hand up by their head while they were sleeping.
Yes.
And that was their position of ease. And then I went back and I looked in the chart for the mom during pregnancy, and I started noticing patterns. And one thing that I noticed that was, really big in my eyes was that a lot of these are pregnant folks were the ones that the adjustment didn't clear out their pain patterns. And the body work didn't clear the pain pattern. And something still hurt when they got up off my table. And I ask every time a pregnant mom jumps off the table, I'm like, is there anything else going on? Check in with your body. See if there's anything that's bringing your attention. Because pain is just communication. And what I started to see is that in the pelvis, if we have a Nuchal hand, we may have pain points where the little hand and the little elbow are. And it could be from side to side. It could be from, back to front, front to back. But how does that hand fit in the pelvis? And what does that do to the head position as well? If there's a hand stuck behind the head, they may not be able to engage symmetrically into the pelvis. And so we started seeing some of these things and putting those things together.
That's really cool.
And then, when they go into labor, we talked about the symmetry just a few minutes ago with the uterus squeezing symmetrically around the head. But if the uterus is just squeezing around this, we may have an extra pain point.
Right. Do you also see sometimes that there's not, because there's not an even pressure, they see things like a cervical lip or different situations like that? Yeah, it's like people assume dilation is always symmetrical, but it's really dependent on what's presenting and putting pressure on the cervix, right? So
if you have the head coming down on the cervix and the head's what we call asynclitic or tilted to the side, that may not connect to the cervix as symmetrically as if they're coming straight down. And so one side of the cervix where there's connection may dilate faster than the other side.
Yeah, so then people think, the modern medical complex is going to say, oh, well, we need to add force, right? We need to get this baby through the pelvis. And we say, well, if there is a baby with an asynclitic and there's different things, and then we force that baby through, now we have a baby stalled, deeper in the pelvis. Whereas if we could be like, hey, what's going on here? Let's get curious. Let's invite in some balance. Let's do some different things. And that's why I'm so passionate about getting this work to all the birth workers, because I feel like if they just had this different, it's like a layer deeper of awareness, we could make a birth a lot safer, right? It can be more empowering, but also safer and less injury.
Well, and let's take that a step further. These babies that come into the pelvis in an asymmetrical fashion get asymmetrical pressure on their cranial plates.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that can cause issues for those babies long term. And, these babies, actually, hang on one second. I'm going to get my fetal skull so I can demonstrate those. I think.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Come into my world a little bit. This is my office now. So when our babies are born, we have the big gaps between our cranial plates, which are known as sutures and fontanelles or soft spots. And so it's really easy for these bones to move out of alignment. And a lot of times we can have, the babies that have this flat spot on the back of their head, or sometimes even they've been growing asymmetrically, so their whole cranium has torsion in it. But ultimately, if you know anything about the vagus nerve, which the vagus nerve is kind of a buzzword right now, vagal response and vagal tone and all of that, the vagus regulates heart rate, breathing. Uh, when the vagus is happy, we tend to have better outlook on life, more social interaction, less stress in our bodies. We tend to just, in general, be happier. When the vagus is irritated, you may see more um, irritation in your life. You may see more anger, things like that, because the body is not regulating well and the nervous system is in fight or flight. And ultimately, if the vagus is happy, we put more into resting digestion and we have better balance in that. But the vagus nerve, if you can see this little hole right here, comes way underneath the bottom of the skull. But this cranial plate and this cranial plate, where they meet underneath, is where that vagus nerve comes out. So if these get compressed, say there's a little hand up by the head and there's all this compression on that, it can cause compression of what we call the jugular foramen, which is where that vagus nerve comes out, and cause a lot more sympathetic response in our babies. And if that's not corrected, then they may have problems throughout their lifetime. And I see that in adults where that's still compressed. Another thing that can be affected with the vagus nerve is your cranial nerves 9, 10, and 11 come out of that hole, the jugular foramen hole. And 9, 10, and 11 are in charge of sucking, swallowing, and breathing.
Ooh, yeah, big one.
Yeah, so these are the babies that may not nurse well, their suck pattern may not regulate, or even worse, they may not be able to regulate their breathing properly. So when we can step back and help our moms be in balance so that babies can be in balance, they come out with less stress in their bodies.
That is such a huge, important thing to talk about. Babies are just accommodating the space they're given, right? So if there is a torque or a torsion, and we're not saying like we shouldn't, I know people will hear this and be like, oh no, like I'm screwed up, so my baby's screwed up. And it's not about that at all. Like we are all inherently a little bit imbalanced, right? Like no one is perfectly balanced. You're never gonna get to that point where you're like, I'm done, I'm good, right? Like it's all a journey. And so the goal isn't to shame people or to think like, oh, and I think about some of my own children and this stuff, and then we just like, we work through it, right? But I do think it does help us to become aware of how important it is to be proactive, right? To during pregnancy, it's not about shame or like forcing yourself to only sit in like neutral pelvis and like stress about it, but it's about like, how can I invite in more vitality and resilience and balance in my structure? Because I feel the same stuff that, make a pregnancy and a birth more comfortable and smooth, or like at least stack the cards in that, in that way, are the same stuff that make us, you're getting ready to welcome your first grandbaby, right? And you want to be able to be up and there and playing with them and someday jumping on the trampoline with that, like as that baby grows into a child, like our, I feel like sometimes these injuries and stuff that, can floor us at birth, and the same with our babies, like let's just take control of the controllables from a place of, I don't know, not overwhelmed. Because I know sometimes people will hear this and say, oh no, and then that, sends the nervous system into this upregulated state. And I think, so what would you say to those people who are like, oh no, she's saying that my baby is gonna struggle? Like what would you do? I kind of have a feeling what you'd say, but what can someone do? Let's say they've given birth, it was a struggle, just like you said you had with the compound. So what can they do, or who can they see, or what can they offer for a baby and for their own bodies afterward?
I mean, I'm pretty partial to chiropractic, and we have a network of pediatric chiropractors throughout the U.S. and really the world. And you can go to icpaforkids.org and look up a practitioner in your area. You limited cranial sacral work for your baby. I think it's really important to make sure that their cranial bones are balanced postpartum. And really, it's never too late. Like I see adults, I have like a 60-something-year-old woman in my practice that had migraines for 30 years, almost daily. because her jugular foramen was compressed.
And maybe from her own birth.
Maybe,
Right?
maybe, or
Who knows? Or a fall or
she got in an accident, or she ran into a
yeah.
block and fell on her bottom, or maybe she tumbled down the stairs. I mean, there's life is an accumulation of micro traumas, and sometimes we have big traumas added into that as well. But when we can rebalance our systems after any kind of trauma, whether it's physical, emotional, or even chemical, like bad nutrition or not enough nutrition, those types of things, we can make big changes.
I love that.
And if you're hearing this while you're pregnant, be proactive. Not only is it going to help your baby, it's going to make you feel a lot better. Like, I use my daughter as an example because she's, at the forefront of my brain right now, but all of her friends are complaining about how uncomfortable they are in pregnancy. And she's like, I feel great.
Oh, that's so good. I mean, can you imagine having Kristen the chiro as your mom through pregnancy? Like the coolest thing ever. I was saying before we came on how, like, man, I can't, God willing, getting to that point, like that's just so beautiful. The gifts that you can offer to, all your clients and your community, and now your own child. That's just, I mean, your adult child, right? That's
Absolutely. I mean, it's the best, to me, it's the greatest gift I can give her. And it hasn't been without work. She was in a pretty serious car accident when she was 16 and got rear-ended. She was stopped. The other car was going 55, and it created a lot of torsion in her organs. Because the seat belt locks the pelvis down and the shoulder goes forwards. Well, all the external organs can also rotate with that and get locked in that fascia. And after that, she had, uh, ovarian cyst issues and, just various things that shifted her cycles, and probably TMI. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Uh, but, she had a lot of torsion patterns that she noticed, and we weren't able to really clear those out until the uterus was 28, 30 weeks, where we could actually get to those torsion patterns and find them. Um, and so, you know, but her knowledge base is helping her create a better pregnancy, from preconception, hopefully through the birth too. I'll let you know in a month.
yeah, I can't wait to hear.
But, just watching that knowledge, and I think if we can share that knowledge so that every woman knows that there's options during your pregnancy and even prenatally to start some of the work to create balance in their body, um, you can have that birth.
Yes, knowledge is power. And like you said, I wish I would have known about cranial sacral therapy for postpartum for the baby or maybe could have afforded it back when I was having my babies, because I see such a profound shift. Now I recommend it to like everyone if they have someone to offer that. My fourth baby came really, really fast, and that had its own um stuff that he had a lot. He was crying. He was like very colicky, and it was, a lot having someone, my midwife was trained in fascial unwinding and was able to do some stuff when I'm the new mom. I just want to lay there, like I'm not going to go into my own practitioner brain. So just having people around you that can support you and support your baby, and finding those resources, I think, is just so profound. So I'd love to hear, so you took our training, our pro training, this last cohort. I would love to hear if you wouldn't mind sharing just kind of takeaways, or why you think people should consider it and who it might be for. Anything you want to share?
Right. So, I mean, I really enjoyed the BRM training. I feel like it was very, very in depth. Your whole package is beautifully done. So, I see how much effort you put into it.
Oh yeah,
It's been a huge undertaking for you, I'm sure.
for sure.
But I mean, I love that, just the professional quality of everything. But past that, there's just a great depth of knowledge. So if you're coming in and you don't have any tools, you're going to probably be overwhelmed with tools in a way. The
Yeah.
fact that you can go back and access them later is great. Uh, but I took away a lot of just, you know, easy things that uh, my pregnant population can do at home. And it gave me more resources and more tools to give them for their homework. I'm big on homework because I can
I love
create
that.
that in about, 5 minutes, but they go home and mess up my good work.
That's so true.
But I
Yeah,
mean, which is normal because they have
it's
those
normal.
fascia pulls and they have those patterns and repetitive stress injuries and things like that. That if I can give them tools to take home with them, and create more awareness than how they stand, how they sit, how they move their body through space, and where their restriction patterns are. Can they move into new space in their body? And I think you really stress that in your package and everything.
Yeah.
And it really, it kind of drives it home that we're not just a snapshot of tension patterns, but we're moving in those tension patterns and where does it play in our body and how can we find tools to help change.
Yeah. I love that. I love, the hands-on body, like chiropractic and massage and fascial unwinding is so pivotal, so important. And then it's like you said, you help them find that balance. And then if they've already, they go back to only standing on the right leg, or they go back into their patterns. And so having like movement tools to, like you said, like repattern, right? We're like, if you always walk and you only walk in hip flexion, like you can create some like acute space, and then how do we like keep it by helping those muscles to be strong in a lengthened position, or like, so yeah, it's really, I love seeing different modalities all coming together, like chiros and massage therapists and midwives and doulas and everyone in between, right? And like we all kind of come together and learn this thing that we can then take off into our own ways of working with people. I think that's the key. And I love you're doing the same with the work you're bringing into the professional space. And I feel like you're bringing that in with like the Nuchal hand stuff and the compounds and the spinning babies work. It's really cool to see how like it's not just for chiros, right? It's for everyone, right? We're all a community. We're all like working together to shift the paradigm of prenatal prep and birth support. So yeah, it's just such an honor to work alongside such game changers like you. So if you could give the question that just came to my head is like, I'd love to hear your advice for a new pro, like someone maybe they just got out of chiropractic school, since that's really your space, or they just got their doula certification and they're really excited to really just make an impact. If you could go back and tell that version of you, or if you could tell them something, what would you offer them?
So what would I tell somebody coming out? Don't be afraid to explore.
Mm,
We get stuck in our own modalities and what we know sometimes, and we forget to look outside of our box. So always keep the door to your box open and available for new information to come in, and to share it with others, because we have so much to give each other and there's so much room for everybody in this world. We don't have to be in competition with, you know, the PTs or the doulas or the midwives or whoever. There's plenty to go around, and we can share it all and create different ripples.
mm. And those ripples, I was just on vacation with my kids, and there was I was watching the ocean, and there was two ripples like going towards each other, and then they like when they got to each other, what happened? The impact grew, right? It was like growing impact. And when we all just create these ripples, eventually it's this big wave of change. And that just like I have goosebumps with what you said, because that's exactly how I feel. Like I think sometimes when you're a new, like maybe I'm a new doula and I'm like, there's so many doulas, how am I gonna find people? You're like, it's not like if somebody takes, it's not a pie where there's only one piece, right? Like it is an ocean and we are all drops. And there is an ocean of possibility for all of us to just, if you're meant to do, like the impact you're meant to give on the world will happen if you just hold that love for the impact, right? And not think about what others are doing, and just, yeah, I love that. So, and again, be curious, be open, explore, right? That's my life mission is just to keep exploring, to keep learning. Like, growth is life. And I love seeing you just in your power, sharing these things with the world. I love seeing how you have taken something like your first birth and it's just grown from there, and your own ripple has turned into this bigger and bigger wave. And now as all of our waves meet, we can hopefully shift the way people come into the world so that we can shift. I don't know, I know you feel the same as me, like peace on earth begins at birth. I know it sounds so cheesy, but it's really, really, I think at the heart of what we do is we want better for everyone.
I know. I think people that start off their life with ease, it's easier for them to fulfill their potential. And we all have a potential and we
Exactly.
all have a reason for being here. And if we can find our passion and follow that without so much of the external stressors on the body during our lives, it gives us the opportunity to create more change.
Yes, and that's such a gift, right? Like, may everyone be in their power, may everyone follow their passion, and that's the way we shift and change the world. So thank you for being a game changer. Thank you for being in community with us, and I'm really excited to watch your continued evolution as you shift the paradigm and as we all work together. So such an honor to be with you today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great being here.